Have you ever watched a movie scene and wondered, how did they make that look so real? Let's get to the bottom of it, shall we? CGI can make some amazing scenes come to life, but sometimes there's a bit more movie magic involved. Here are some famous movie scenes that used practical effects instead of CGI that just might surprise you. Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer made quite the explosion at the box office, pun slightly intended. But did you know the atomic bomb at the center of this film was real? Okay, it wasn't actually a bomb, but there was no help from computer-made graphics to get this amazing effect. Nolan is one director who loves practical effects and frequently chooses them over the use of CGI. And you'll be seeing his work pop up in this video quite a few times. One particularly difficult thing that he loves to create using practical effects: explosions. There's the airplane in Tenet, this memorable Inception moment, and many more. Yep, all practical stuff. But of course, there's no explosion quite as big as that of the atomic bomb. According to Nolan, quote, "Recreating the Trinity test without the use of computer graphics was a huge challenge to take on. Luckily, the work that went into making it look real definitely paid off." Explosions and action-packed stunts are some of the first things that come to mind when we think of surprising practical effects. But in reality, there are lots of other surprisingly non-CGI movie moments, like the characters in Pan's Labyrinth. Director Guillermo del Toro knows a lot about special effects makeup, so that made the choice to use this for his iconic Pan's Labyrinth creatures an easy one.
I started doing short films, and most of my short films needed makeup effects, so I started learning makeup effects to do my own movies.
Both the Fawn and the Pale Mane's costumes took 5 hours and special machinery to apply for shooting, and some CGI was added in afterwards for things like those famous hand eyeballs. Ready to have a whole new view of one of the most iconic scenes in film history? That Boulder scene in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark wasn't digitally made. It was a fake, man-made boulder, but it still weighed about 300 pounds. So the effect when it's chasing you is definitely the same as if it were real. The boulder was made of wood, fiberglass, and plaster, and Harrison Ford had to run away from it 10 times to get that perfect scene. Did we mention that Christopher Nolan loves practical effects? So there's no way that this truck flipping scene in The Dark Knight was CGI, right? You guessed it, this was actually real. According to cinematographer Wally Pfister, quote, "Chris Nolan kept challenging everybody to come up with ideas of how we could beef up these action sequences and do something no one had ever done before. So they decided to flip over an actual 18-wheeler. They used a truck rig with a steel piston that came out of the back to flip the vehicle." The Dark Knight may have had some pretty impressive practical effects, but The Dark Knight Rises took things to another level, literally. When doing their special effects, the sky was the limit. They actually dropped the plane out of the sky. Of course, this took a lot of preparation and plenty of rehearsing to ensure that only the characters were in danger and no one else. Batman isn't the only superhero with some real movie magic up his sleeve. Did you know Spider-Man, or should we say Tobey Maguire, actually did this?
Wow.
No, he doesn't really have spidey senses, but he did have his hand covered in sticky glue to keep that tray in place. Even so, this took a whopping 156 takes to get right. So we can only imagine that Mary Jane's reaction to this moment was actually Kirsten Dunst's real feelings shining through about finally getting this shot right. The White House explosion in Independence Day is actually real, but no, they didn't actually blow up the White House. You definitely would have heard about that. Instead, they blew up a very detailed replica of the White House. Making this replica was clearly far from easy, but the results were worth it for this legendary moment. Christopher Nolan was back at his practical effect mastery with Inception. The director once said, quote, "There's no substitute for real human energy and performance." And this movie moment proves him right. These actors were actually performing in a rotating hallway.
There is, I think, 8 30-foot diameter rings, which were all joined together, and each one of those rings was rotated using an electric motor.
The intense engineering and camera work used to accomplish this were far from easy. And so was the acting.
You have to have the right mindset and the right physicality to do it. It was not easy.
But all the work paid off, and we never would have known what a challenge it was. That hallway scene wasn't the only time that actors had to play with gravity to get an important shot. In Apollo 13, Ron Howard used the Boeing KC-135, aka the Vomit Comet, which is typically used to train NASA astronauts. To film these shots to look like there's no gravity, the actors traveled in arcs in the aircraft. At the top of each arc, they'd be weightless for just over 20 seconds. So they filmed 40 of these arcs every morning and 40 every night to acquire enough footage. Another takeoff that was surprisingly real, this moment in Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation. Tom Cruise is a pro at doing his own stunts, and this airplane moment was no exception. He wore a harness and protective contact lenses while holding onto the airplane.
And that feeling, man, the airplane left the ground and I couldn't hold my feet on them.
And he did it a total of 8 times to make sure they got the shot they needed. If you're a Mad Max Fury Road fan, then you may be surprised to discover just how many of these amazing stunts were real. According to stunt coordinator Guy Norris, quote, "We wanted to make it real. Real vehicles, real locations, real movement, and real stunts. This was far from simple. It required lots of specific machinery to get the shots, but the result was definitely worth it." From an ongoing car chase to a fight on a moving train, the first fight scene in Skyfall was done practically. Yes, this was actually filmed on a moving train. Daniel Craig filmed a lot of this scene himself, and a stunt double jumped in for some extra risky moments. But this improvised moment, that was all Craig. Talk about truly embodying James Bond. Did you know that these scenes weren't totally done with CGI? What are your favorite practical effects from other movies that most people think are CGI? Let's talk about it in the comments. And for more deep dives into your favorite movies, be sure to like and subscribe to The Things.